Hey guys, today we're in the book of Judges, chapter 1. Now, before we get started into our reading, a couple things that you need to know. One is the book of Judges can be divided up into 3 sections. The first section is just chapters 1 and 2. It gives an introduction of what's going on in Israel, but the main point is that Israel did not drive out the Canaanites. Remember, God has told them from the very beginning when they come into the promised land to drive them out, and we're going to see in chapters 1 and 2 that they did not. The second section is chapters 3 through 16. God is going to allow 6 judges to come on the scene. Now, when we say a judge, don't think in your mind like a judge with a gavel in today's courts. Think of a tribal leader, okay? A warrior, if you will. And so he's going to bring up these 6 judges, and we're going to kind of get some case studies on these judges. Now, these judges are not over all of Israel, okay? They're over their part of Israel, their tribe of Israel, but it is kind of a case study all around Israel to see what's going on throughout all of Israel, okay? So we're going to learn about the 6 judges, and we're going to find out how they become corrupt, how they are walking away from God. And then lastly, the third section starts in chapter 17 and goes through chapter 21. And this is going to show us some case studies on the people of Israel and how they are going corrupt, how they are walking away from God. So chapters 1 and 2, they don't drive out the Canaanites. Chapters 3 through 16, how their leaders are walking away from God. And then chapters 17 through 21, how are the people of Israel walking away from God. Now, one more thing that you got to understand as you read the book of Judges. The book of Judges covers a time span around 340 years, okay? 340 years. And so there's a lot to read here. And of course, it's not a very big book, so we're not going to get all the details, but you're getting the lowlights and the highlights of trying just to basically learn what Israel is doing. They've had Moses leading them, they've had Joshua leading them, and now what happens? That's the book of Judges. So we're going to kick off with verse 1, and it says, after the death of Joshua, yesterday, right, Joshua leaves, so now Moses is dead, Joshua is dead, so who is the next leader? And notice what it says. The people of Israel did the right thing. They inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? Israel does the right thing once. They do the right thing and they say, God, who's the first tribe to go after the Canaanites, right? Who do you want to lead this? Now remember, as they divided the land in the book of Joshua, there were still lots of people out. Remember, Joshua and Phinehas were dividing it up, and they said, as you go into your land, then you as a tribe will chase out and remove all of the Canaanites. Remember, God wanted all the Canaanites to be removed for 2 reasons. One, their sin would not be near Israel, tempting them to come into sin. Number 2, their worship practices, the way that they worship, would not come close to the way of Israel to bring sin into the worship practices. So God said, you've got to kill them all. You got to get rid of them. They are bad news. Well, they don't do that. But they start out with a good heart, a good mind. God, who do you want to go first? And notice this, the Lord answered. When they asked, the Lord answered. And he said, Judah shall go up. Judah, the tribe of the Messiah, the tribe that the king of the Messiah will come out of, but it was also the largest and the strongest tribe. So in a military kind of setting, you would think, well, that makes sense, right? The biggest and the strongest should go first. So Judah goes, but notice what happens in verse 3. Judah goes to the tribe of Simeon and says, hey, if you join us and help us take out the enemies in Judah, I'll help you take out the enemies in Simeon. And they were like, that's a pretty good idea. We'll agree to that, right? So Judah and Simeon, they team up. And we can see in verse 4, when Judah went up, the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them, right? So they were faithful, they did what it was, and they kind of cleared out the Canaanites that were in and around Judah and Simeon. I want to speak, because I know I'm going to have a question. In verse 6, they chase after a king, right? They chase after Adoni-Bezek. This is a king of the north, was nowhere near Simeon or Judah. But it says when they found him, they cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And I know somebody's going to ask, why did they do that? This king, Adoni-Bezek, was a great warrior. He was a great warrior for the Perizzites. And so why do they do that? If you cut off your thumbs, you can no longer grip a sword, right? You can't hold anything. If you cut off your big toes, you are out of balance and you can no longer run. So he could no longer fight. He could no longer run. This was very common practice in war back then. So instead of killing him, they basically just made him nothing, right? They didn't do what God said, though, right? God said, get them out of there. They didn't kill the king. They just wounded him, right? And we'll see as we come in, as we continue to read, this will be a problem. Then in verse 8, then the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem. This is the same Jerusalem we know. And they captured it, and they struck it with the edge of the sword in the city and set the city on fire, right? So here we have them taking Jerusalem, which is a good thing, properly in the tribe of Judah. But we'll see they'll lose it in just a few verses. Afterwards, the men of Judah came down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negeb, in the lowland. This is all the southern region, the desert region of Israel. And Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron, and they defeated them. And from there, they went against the inhabitants of Debir. And then they go on, and now we can see a little story that starts to kind of start here, right? So they go up to Debir, which is next to the land of Caleb. Remember Caleb? He's one of the original 12 spies. The 10 were bad, 2 were good, Joshua and Caleb, right? Joshua has now died. Caleb is now left. He is the one that said, send me to the land of the giants, and I will continue to fight for the Lord. And so now time has passed, and he says, hey, here's the deal. If you come and help me, anybody who comes and helps me finish out these giants, I will give you my daughter as your wife. And we see here, Onethnal, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it and gave him Achsah, his niece, right, his daughter, and said, you can be for a wife. And so now, he said, if you help me, I'll give you my daughter. Onethnal comes and says, all right, I'll do this. He does it. He now gets a wife. But now when his wife comes to him, she says, hey, you need to ask my dad for a blessing. We need a field. We need some land, right? And so here, this is what happens. And he says, what do you want me to do? She said to her father, give me a blessing. Give me a field. Give me somewhere to live. Since you send me to the Negeb, to the desert where there is nothing, also give me springs of water. And so she says, hey, I need a place to live. I need some water. So give me some of the things you own. And he does it. And then the descendants of the Kenites, they go up. They went up against the people of Judah from the city of palms. The city of palms is also known as Jericho. It's just kind of this. It doesn't say that in your Bible, but that's what it is. It's Jericho, city of palms. And what happens? Judah goes in. They start to capture Gaza, Ashkelon, Ekron. These are Philistine cities. And they're going in and they're battling and they're battling and they're battling. But notice what it says in verse 19. And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. They had technology. They had modern warfare, right? Israel would have obtained some chariots from taking over the promised land, but these would all been wooden chariots. They cannot go against these chariots of iron, right? So here we see as Judah and Simeon are kind of helping drive out the Canaanites. Here they're doing it, God is blessing it, but they could not drive them all out. Notice verse 21. The people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites. Verse 22, the house of Joseph the house of Joseph went against. Verse 25, and they let the man and all of his family go. Verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out. 29, Ephraim did not drive out. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out. 31, Asher did not drive out. Verse 33, Naphtali did not drive out. Verse 34, the Amorites, which are the enemies, right? They're a part of the Canaanites. The Amorites pressed the people of Dan. So Dan could not drive them out. But actually the Amorites were bigger, and pressing Dan up into the mountains and up into the country would not let them come into the plains where the towns and the villages were. So we can see here in chapter 1 what Moses told Israel to do, right? Well, let's start over. What God told Moses was to defeat all the Canaanites. Moses tells Israel, defeat all the Canaanites. Moses tells Joshua, defeat all the Canaanites. Joshua tells all of Israel, defeat all the Canaanites. They did not do that under Joshua, and now that Joshua is dead, now they are battling, they're pressing their land, they're trying to take over their promised land allotments, but they're not doing what the Lord told them to do. They are not driving out the inhabitants of their land. And so what's happening, if you kind of read between all those verses we skipped, it's not like it's just an enemy and a non-enemy. What happens is the Canaanites and the Israelites start to mesh together. They start to live together. Remember, God said, I want them out because they are full of sin and they worship false gods. But we're going to start to see what we know as parents is not that the good makes the bad good, but the bad always makes the good bad, right? Paul talks about this in his letter to the Corinthians, right? Bad company ruins good character. And we're going to see this. And all of a sudden, they start to not listen to God's word, and the enemy of God starts to mesh in with the people of God. And we're going to see what happens. And the reality is, Israel starts to fall farther and farther and farther away from God. You would ask yourself, where in the world do you see Jesus here in chapter 1? Well, what's interesting is go back to Caleb's daughter, right? Anybody that can come and help me, you can have my daughter as your bride. And Onethel comes, and this is what he does, but she comes back to the Father, and she does exactly what Jesus says. Jesus tells us in the book of Luke is to ask, to seek, and to knock, right? If you need anything, you ask from the Lord, and the Lord will give it to you. And this is exactly what she does. She has that courage. She has that boldness. She has that faith in her Father that says, hey, I'm doing what you want me to do. I need some help. Can you support me? Can you give me a place to stay? Can you give me a spring of water that I may drink of? How in the world am I supposed to do well in the place that you've put me if you don't support me? And so we see that she goes to her Father and she asks the same way that Jesus tells us. Where Jesus has us in our life, we are to ask God for the things that we need. Not the things that we want, but the things that we need. God has placed her and her new husband in a place, and she needed things to prosper. As God moves us in our life, we are to have faith in God, and we are to ask of God. We are to seek, we are to knock, we are to ask, and the Lord who loves us will provide the things that we ultimately need. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we will see you tomorrow in Judges chapter 2. God bless.